Just let me have a look. Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I want to take the opportunity to respond to some of the comments that the Minister made from the Chair and to seek a little more clarity from her, because it's always helpful to hear directly from the Minister around their intent and for some of these clauses. The Minister responded to some of our calls around Clause 4, that rather than having a split definition for the age around care and protection and then a split definition for youth justice, as this bill now contains, that she had worked through the number of young people who would be brought into the system and that there simply wasn't capability within the system to deal with an extra 5,000 young people. Two quick responses to that. Firstly, not all young people under those circumstances would need to go into youth justice residence. They wouldn't all, by default, be given supervision with residence, as was implied, and so we wouldn't suddenly have 5,000 people needing to go into the system. Even then, there would be a way to deal with that, and I'm not saying the implication was that we just couldn't, there wasn't capacity within youth justice to deal with it. Even then, one simple way around that would be to phase in that the commencement of that element of the Act. And on this side of the House, we would have supported that. We're absolutely pragmatic. We understand that that would have taken time to build what capacity might have been required. And I would, for instance, encourage the Minister to shut Te Puniwai tomorrow and start again when it comes to services in the South Island. And so if that meant building in a later commencement date so we had services that weren't dangerous to young people, we would work alongside the Minister for that. But we have that capacity in this House to build in commencement dates that are staggered. So we would have supported that. And so I don't think that that is a justification to have what the Children's Commissioner has described as a very difficult logistical way to deal with young people in two systems. The second point that I wanted to make is the Minister talked about overall that this bill is about trying to do things differently to make sure we improve outcomes for kids. Look, no one is saying that the outcomes we have now are good. Even the Children's Commissioner, Russell Wills, pointed out that in some circumstances, the point at which we intervene is not necessarily an improvement on the environment that these young people are in. Now, that is a staggering comment to make and should give us pause for thought. So no one here is arguing that we've got great outcomes and we don't need to do anything. However, making the argument that this, for instance, this bill we have before us is going to be the thing that changes everything fails to acknowledge that we never actually really gave the current system we have a very good shot. It's the analogy I would draw is it's like driving around a brand new car for 10 years, never servicing it, never changing the tyres, never putting oil in the car, and then when it breaks down saying, well, that car was stuffed, let's chuck it out. If you do not service a system properly, resource it properly, work alongside to build the capacity of your professionals properly, of course you're going to have problems. Taking powers away from professionals and giving them to others, carte blanche with a blank cheque, changes nothing about the way you originally resourced the system. So that is an analogy I just wanted to make. Mr Chair, I also wanted to absolutely acknowledge that, and when the Minister talked about Section 7, she talked about wanting to make, clauses 7, which have been the most controversial of all of the clauses that we are discussing. She talked about the need to make sure that we do the work properly. Absolutely agree. In fact, had the Minister wanted to take a bit more pause over this bill, maybe keep it at Select Committee a little bit longer and spend a bit more time putting more definitions and constraints around the delegated powers, we would have been able to give that proper consideration. Because some of the examples I have heard of how we might want to delegate powers have been reasonably innocuous. For instance, I've heard the idea that psychologists might want to be able to have the ability to put a report directly to the family court rather than via a social worker. Reasonably innocuous thing to do. If that was what the bill said, yeah, we would have been able to consider that and probably look quite favourably on it. That makes sense. That is not what this bill says, and I must be absolutely clear on that. In fact, what the member on the other side of the House referred to when talking about other community organisations, Mr. Chair.
Jacinda,
Mr. Chair. Oh, my name, right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In fact, when the other side has talked about other community organisations being able to carry out functions, obviously the ability for those organisations to be part of the differential response model, we support. We implemented that. But we clearly defined what our intent was, what power those organisations should have, and in fact, our powers that those organisations were comfortable with. We had a scenario at Select Committee where we had organisations who might be the professionals the Minister describes as taking over these powers who said, we don't know what they are, A, and B, if they're as big as the Minister, as this bill implies, we don't want them. We don't want those powers. Because let's be absolutely clear, given that the Minister talked about the need to take a multidisciplinary approach to working with children. That makes it sound like we're going to have psychologists and social workers working alongside each other to formulate a plan for a child. That's what it sounds like. But what the bill says, this multidisciplinary approach, let's be very clear, means that they might have the power to have powers under Section 39 of the SIFS Act given to them. What is that power? That's the power to remove a child. That's the power to go and uplift a child. What about 40? That's the enforcement of access rights. That's taking possession of a child and taking them to an access arrangement. You don't need a multidisciplinary approach to uplift a child under those circumstances. What you need is accountability, responsibility, and oversight. That's what you need. What about ensuring that a child is at a hearing, or search warrants to recover a child who is absconded or absent, or safety warrants? None of these are things that are about trying to, for instance, give psychologists greater access to the family court, or, for instance, giving a paediatrician a say into a care plan for a child. All of that we would have probably sat down and considered very reasonably. That is not what this bill does. And, Minister, I just would like to highlight again, we absolutely agree that we want to, of course, work towards the best outcomes for children, but there's a reason that the SIFS Act since 1989 has been very specific that only police officers and SIFS social workers, not even differential response social workers, not even contracted social workers, but SIFS social workers have those roles. And that is because we have to be the ones with the care and the responsibility and accountability. That if we make a mistake collectively as the state, then we are the ones that must take responsibility. And the closest example I can draw is that you would never want these powers to be held by the likes of a Serco. And the Minister might say that that's an extreme example, but actually I've got nothing here to demonstrate to me in Clause 7 that they couldn't have that power delegated to them. In fact, under 7CB, it explicitly states that you could have someone who has contractual obligations, who sits entirely outside of the state, could have these powers awarded to them. That is significant. And if that is not what the Minister intended to do, then the Minister should have been explicit about that. We might have then had a position where all of us could have supported this bill, because the Minister knows how hard we campaigned for some of the elements that are in this bill. It really, I'm being honest, it breaks me that we are going to be in a position where we're going to have to vote against that, because the powers that we are giving to just about anyone are too great. That is the true test of how far this bill is going, Mr. Chair. And just perhaps to also draw on one of the points the Minister to finish on, she talked about, for instance, as an example, contracts with iwi and how the delegation powers would enable, I'm assuming, a greater role for iwi in working with children in these situations. Well, actually, A, we're being able to do that now. B, have you asked iwi if they want the ability to remove a child, to investigate a child abuse allegation involving a child? Do they want those powers? It's a genuine question. I have a big question mark over whether they would want those powers. And B, you can't say with one breath we want to enhance the relationship with iwi and then put out a cabinet paper that says we're going to fundamentally remove the presumption that they are going to be the first place we go to when we place a child if they're being removed from their whānau. Because that is in direct contradiction with all of the principles the Minister claims she's trying to uphold.
Jan Logie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.